My name is Avery Sterling, and I was the ghost of Sterling Manor. If you're watching this, you probably know the feeling of being the background extra in your own life. For me, that feeling was amplified by 7 figures of generational wealth and a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, that looked less like a family home and more like a preparatory school for CEOs. On paper, we were the American dream's perfect glossy photo. My father, Robert Sterling, or Bob, was a titan in corporate law, the kind of man who commanded a room just by clearing his throat. My mother, Catherine, managed 3 separate charity boards and knew exactly which forks to use at a state dinner. Their lives were about status, connection, and maintaining the flawless facade. And then there was me, Avery, the eldest child, the straight-A student, the one who caused no trouble. My brother, Liam, 2 years my junior, was the sun around which the Sterling galaxy spun. Liam was their miracle. My mother would constantly reference the complications she faced with his birth, a hush drama that cast Liam in the role of the precious, hard-won son. Liam had the effortless charm, the quarterback smile, and the natural athletic grace. Every minor victory of his was a national holiday. His B- in AP history, a sign of his well-rounded, non-obsessive approach to life, celebrated with an impromptu trip to the dealership to pick out his first car. My straight A's and perfect AP scores, they were simply the expected yield from the Sterling DNA and the hefty tuition bills. They were never celebrated, they were just noted, like the changing of the seasons. I remember my 8th birthday vividly. It wasn't about missing a party, it was about the scale of the difference. My parents had promised a special day, but when the day arrived, Dad was stuck closing a massive merger, and Mom was flying to a medical conference. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, a wonderful woman, brought home a store-bought cake with thick, waxy frosting and sang happy birthday to me in the sprawling, echoey dining room. Just the 2 of us. Fast forward 2 weeks to Liam's 6th birthday. They rented out a private wing of the Connecticut Science Center, flew in a beloved children's TV host, and invited 50 of his classmates. The local paper even ran a small feature on the young Sterling's extravagant celebration. That was the moment I stopped expecting them to show up. That was the first lesson I learned. My love and validation would always be earned by their effort, and their effort was 0. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was worse. It was absolute indifference. They didn't neglect me out of anger. They neglected me because I didn't need them to manage my success. I was the reliable old Volvo, always running perfectly, while Liam was the high-maintenance Ferrari that required constant attention and calibration to perform. They chose the Ferrari. Every time. When I won the statewide coding competition in 10th grade, the one that really set the course for my career, I took the Metro North train home alone, lugging the heavy glass trophy. When I walked in, Dad was pacing the foyer, phone glued to his ear, arguing about a client. Mom was in the kitchen, frantically ordering food. I tried to interrupt them. Mom, Dad, I won the championship. Look! I held up the trophy. My mother glanced at it, her eyes already darting back to her phone. That's lovely, honey. Of course you did. Now, could you please run out to the pantry and check if we have enough of the good bourbon for your father's partners? Liam has a major lacrosse scrimmage this weekend, and we need a quiet night tonight. I felt the immense weight of the trophy suddenly become hollow. It was just a heavy piece of glass. It meant nothing here. I realized then that my accomplishments didn't give me value in their eyes. They only confirmed their own brilliance as parents of a self-sufficient child. It was a reflection of them, never a celebration of me. This pattern of being the reliable one, the unacknowledged one, continued until I finally saw my golden ticket out. College. I worked myself into the ground, driven by the pure, desperate hope of distance. The day I received my full, merit-based scholarship acceptance letter to MIT for computer science, I thought, this is it. They have to see me now. This is undeniable. I ran home, vibrating with excitement, clutching the thick envelope. Of course, they were hosting one of their semi-annual client dinners, a crucial event for Dad's firm. When I found my mother, dazzling in a gown and pearls, she was directing caterers. Mom, I need to tell you. She pulled me into the nearest cloakroom, her voice a sharp, urgent whisper. Avery, not now. We have Senator Matthews and the CEO of Omnicorp arriving. These people are critical to your father's next partnership push. Go up to your room. You can share your news later. But, Mom, I whispered, the excitement draining into a cold pit of disappointment. I got into MIT with a full scholarship. She gave me a quick, distracted pat on the arm, like she was checking a texture. That's wonderful, honey. We expected you would. Could you please ask Mrs. Davis to bring out more wine for our guests? Run along. I was 18, accepted into one of the most competitive programs in the world, having achieved the single greatest academic accomplishment of my life, and I was being asked to perform the duties of a highly capable, unpaid servant. That night, I helped Mrs. Davis clear plates, nodding politely at the important guests, all while the acceptance letter felt like a scorching piece of paper hidden in my backpack. They were right. They expected it. They were never going to be proud of me for me. They were only ever going to be proud of themselves for raising me. MIT was supposed to be my escape. It turned out to be just the beginning of my invisibility training. MIT was everything I dreamed of, a crucible of intelligence, drive, and real recognition for my work. For the first time, my straight A's and late nights coding actually earned me respect, not just expectation. I poured myself into my studies, determined to make myself financially and emotionally firewall protected from the Sterlings forever. But the most painful moments are often delayed. They don't hit you when you expect them. They creep up on you years later, proving that the pattern is truly unbreakable. The worst realization of my college career came during my sophomore year. I had been selected for the Pioneer Undergraduate Research Award, a massive deal given to only 5 students nationwide, supporting a complex machine learning project I had designed. The ceremony was high profile, held on a Saturday, complete with industry sponsors and media. For months, I carefully laid the groundwork. I called my parents repeatedly, confirming the date, the time, the location. I stressed the importance of the event. Yes, Avery, we have it marked, Dad had assured me, his voice a drone over the phone while I knew he was checking his email. We're proud of you. Of course, we'll be there. I even reserved them front row seats, right in the center, a perfectly clear sight line to the stage where I would accept the massive engraved plaque. As I stood backstage, adjusting the microphone and waiting for the introductory fanfare, my stomach was tight with a mix of nerves and a tiny, fragile bud of hope. This was it. This was the moment they would see me shine in an environment they couldn't dismiss as mere homework. I scanned the audience just before I walked out. The hall was packed with professors, industry leaders, and families. And there they were, 2 perfectly empty, velvet-covered seats in the very first row, right behind the university dean. 2 empty, gaping holes that represented every childhood disappointment rolled into one. I walked onto that stage, gave my acceptance speech, and shook hands with 3 different Fortune 500 CEOs, all with a practiced smile, all while feeling like a vacuum had opened up in my chest. My national academic recognition had been superseded by an empty gesture. After the ceremony, my phone buzzed 3 times. Missed calls from my mother. I called her back, my voice flat. "Hello." "Avery." "Oh, honey, I am so sorry." She rushed, her tone not exactly regretful, but exasperated. Liam's regional swimming meet was rescheduled at the very last minute. A scheduling mix-up with the venue. It was today. We simply couldn't miss it. It's the qualifiers for the state championship, you understand. A high school regional swim meet. That was what replaced my national academic recognition. I remember thinking, not with anger, but with profound clarity, they didn't forget. They prioritized. They decided that Liam's chance to win a high school sports medal was fundamentally more valuable to the Sterling brand than my career-defining academic award. I didn't argue. I just stopped expecting. I stopped hoping. I simply said, "I see. Well, the ceremony was fine. Talk to you later." But the real, soul-crushing moment came a year later, during my junior year. My mother, Catherine, had a severe bout of viral pneumonia. She wasn't critically ill, but she needed intense home care. My father called, his voice heavy with the "we need to make a sacrifice" tone he used when asking his partners to pull all-nighters. "Avery," he began, "your mother needs you. We need you here. I need you to take a leave of absence from MIT. We need you home." I was stunned. "Dad, I'm halfway across the country. I'm maintaining a perfect 4.0. I'm deep into my research project. Liam is attending NYU, right here in the city. Why can't he take time off? He's a pre-med student. He has mandatory rotations here anyway. Liam is on a very strict pre-med track," Dad snapped, dismissing my suggestion with the finality of a courtroom judge. "He cannot afford to lose momentum. You, Avery, are the one who is self-sufficient. You're flexible. That's what a good daughter does. She puts her family first." And just like that, the expectations of the self-sufficient, capable daughter came full circle. My independence wasn't a source of pride. It was a liability. It made me the disposable one, the one who could be cut loose without affecting the main event, Liam's life. I complied, because the wiring of 3 decades told me that if I didn't comply, I would lose the tiny sliver of hope that they would one day see me as a good person, if not a valuable daughter. That semester turned into a year. I returned to MIT with my momentum shattered, my research position filled by another student, and my entire schedule thrown off track. The next 2 years of college were pure hustle. I took every available coding job, worked in the campus IT department, and barely slept. I was funding myself because that was easier than begging them for tuition after they essentially forced me to pause my scholarship. That year of caregiving taught me the final, crucial lesson. I was a tool in the Sterling toolbox, not a member of the Sterling family. My only currency was my usefulness. It was a cold, hard truth, but it was the truth. And it prepared me perfectly for the ultimate escape. The year I spent home, tethered to Sterling Manor and my mother's recovery, wasn't just a physical break from college. It was a deep, psychological fracturing. When I returned to MIT, the world felt different. I wasn't the bright, eager junior who left. I was a weary, financially strapped senior who had seen the ugly underbelly of family obligation. The tragedy wasn't just the missed research opportunity. Though losing that Pioneer Award project slot felt like having my intellectual right arm removed. The real tragedy was the stark contrast between my sacrifice and Liam's uninterrupted path. While I was fetching broth, managing my mother's medication schedules, and essentially running a small, high-end nursing operation out of my childhood bedroom. Liam was living his life blocks away at NYU, occasionally dropping by for 10 minutes of forced pleasantries before heading back to his pre-med rotations. "Liam has so much pressure, dear," Mom would say, her voice still weak but authoritative. "These medical boards are critical. He needs his focus." And I, the good daughter, the compliant one, would simply nod, holding back the sharp retort that my scholarship and my own future were just as critical. I never said it, of course. To voice my pain was to be dramatic. To demand fairness was to be selfish. I learned to swallow my resentments until they became a solid, heavy stone in my gut. I watched the way they interacted with Liam during that year. They subsidized his rent for his Manhattan apartment, paid for his Kaplan prep courses and his car insurance. They asked him genuine, detailed questions about his rotations. "How was the or today, sweetie? Did you scrub in?" When they looked at me, it was always with a kind of vague, satisfied dismissal. "Avery, you're so wonderful with the scheduling software. You're so efficient. That's what beautiful daughters do." They framed my sacrifice not as a loving act of devotion, but as confirmation of my inherent, compliant nature. I was the reliable utility, the backup generator that kicks in when the main power, Liam, is temporarily unavailable. When I finally went back to MIT, the financial strain was immediate and crushing. The terms of my scholarship had lapsed due to the interruption. While the university was kind enough to reinstate it, the cost of living and the sheer momentum I'd lost meant I had to scramble. I took late-night freelance coding jobs. I worked every holiday, while my classmates were enjoying easy spring breaks funded by their helicopter parents. I was pulling double shifts in the IT server room, debugging code for a local startup. The worst part, they barely noticed I was gone again. When I told them I was flying back to Boston, my mother simply said, "Oh, good. Mrs. Davis really needs a break. We'll send you some money for your expenses." The check they sent didn't even cover the semester's rent. They thought a token gesture of a few $1,000s was sufficient payment for a year of my life and the derailment of my entire academic trajectory. But the isolation had an unexpected benefit. It forged me into steel. I realized that the only person who would ever truly look out for Avery Sterling was Avery Sterling. My self-sufficiency became my shield and my greatest asset. I learned to code faster, work harder, and negotiate better than anyone. My work became my sanctuary, the one place where I was valued purely for my output, not for my compliance. After graduation, I moved to a small apartment in Boston and tried to maintain the semblance of a relationship. I'd fly back to Greenwich for Thanksgiving, sitting silently at the massive mahogany table while the conversation flowed endlessly around Liam's latest achievements, his residency placement, his new fiancée, his expensive hobbies. If I tried to interject with a development in my career, say, being promoted to lead developer at a rapidly scaling tech company, the conversation would instantly, seamlessly pivot back to Liam's latest golf handicap or Dad's new, high-profile client. It was like shouting into a void. I wasn't trying to compete. I was trying to exist. But in their narrative, my existence was dull. My success was quiet. Liam's success, however, was loud, performative, and perfect for the Sterling brand. I remember one family dinner, years after college. I mentioned I was thinking of investing in a small property. My mother gave a polite but dismissive laugh. "Oh, honey, don't worry about that. Let your father manage the heavy lifting. You just focus on your computer thing. That computer thing. My career. My passion. My six-figure salary job creating complex software used by millions of people worldwide. It was reduced to a hobby, a trivial pastime suitable for the socially awkward eldest daughter. That subtle, continuous dismissal chipped away at the last fragments of my desire for their approval. I started to understand that nothing I achieved, no trophy, no degree, no salary, would change the narrative they had constructed about me. I was the quiet one, the odd one, the less social one, and therefore the less successful one. And that narrative was far more comforting to them than the truth. The only way out, I finally realized, wasn't to achieve more. The only way out was to completely rewrite my own script in a place where the Sterlings had no influence, no expectations, and crucially, no memory of who I was supposed to be. I decided to build a life so complete, so vibrant, and so necessary that their absence wouldn't feel like a hole, but a release. The breaking point was closer than I thought. It came, ironically, during the most festive time of the year. The ultimate breaking point didn't happen with a shout or a dramatic exit. It was a slow, quiet death of hope, delivered over perfectly seared lamb chops on Christmas Eve 2 years ago. I had flown back to Greenwich, dutifully for the holiday, convinced I could still handle the emotional neutrality required to survive 48 hours in the gilded cage. I had just achieved a massive professional milestone. I was promoted to head of innovation pipeline at my company, a role that came with a significant bump and, more importantly, multi-million-dollar stock options that were starting to vest. It was a major achievement in the tech space, the kind of role that required strategy, political savvy, and raw technical chops. We were seated around the massive dining table. Liam, already a respected surgical resident, was holding court, discussing his new luxury condo purchase in Tribeca, a purchase heavily subsidized by a generous parental gift. Everyone was leaning in, Mom beaming, Dad offering advice on property tax law. I tried to join the conversation, naturally. That's fantastic, Liam. Actually, speaking of property, I've been structuring my investments to diversify my risk exposure. My father interrupted, not rudely, but with that practiced, subtle deflection. Yes, well, Avery has always been good with the little details. Speaking of Tribeca, Liam, did you tell your mother about Madison's grandfather? He practically owns half of the industrial zoning down there. The conversation pivoted instantly, leaving my investment strategy, which was, frankly, more complex and potentially more lucrative than Liam's condo purchase, dangling in the air, dismissed as little details. I stayed quiet, watching them, feeling the familiar, cold sense of being a museum exhibit rather than a participant. Then my mother turned to me, her eyes kind, but utterly vacant of recognition. "Harper, you're so quiet tonight," she said, using my old name, the one I'd been trying to shed professionally. "Are you still doing that computer thing? Have you thought about going back to school for something more suitable?" I froze. My mouth went dry. "More suitable?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. "More suitable than my high-level, seven-figure role creating software used by millions of people?" My father chuckled, the sound patronizing and dismissive. "Your mother just means something more sociable, Avery. You know, you always were better with machines than with people. That's fine. It's a respectable career path for a woman who prefers to work quietly." The implication hit me like a physical blow. They weren't complimenting my skill. They were cementing their narrative. I was socially awkward, less desirable, and therefore relegated to a solo career behind a screen. They had created a fictional version of me, the quiet, less successful daughter, and no fact, no achievement, no amount of money could possibly change that deeply held conviction. I looked around the table, at my father, whose eyes held only calculation, at my mother, whose concern was only for my appearance, not my substance. At Liam, who was already back to talking about his new car lease. They had no idea who I was. They did not care to know. My entire existence in their space was defined by what I wasn't. I wasn't Liam. That night, lying in the impeccably decorated guest room, which still felt cold and foreign, I made the silent, ironclad decision. I wasn't going to fight their narrative anymore. I was going to evaporate from it. I was going to build a life so far removed from the Sterling influence that their opinion would lose all its gravity. I smiled politely through the rest of the holiday, helped Mrs. Davis clean up, and packed my bags. I didn't say goodbye. I left a generic note saying I had an early flight back to Boston. The next morning I was on a flight back, but not to my old apartment. I was flying to Seattle for my final interview with Apex Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech firms on the West Coast. I accepted the senior director of product position the moment they offered it. The compensation package was jaw-dropping, a massive base salary, relocation package, and stock options that, if the company continued its trajectory, would set me up for life. My move to the West Coast was executed with military precision. I hired a specialized moving company, sold most of my furniture, and handled all the logistics myself. I didn't send a change of address card. I didn't send an email. I didn't tell a soul in my family that I was moving 3,000 miles across the country. I wanted to test the theory. I wanted to see how long it would take for the family who supposedly cared so much about their family aesthetic to realize their eldest daughter had completely vanished from the East Coast grid. I waited for a call, a text, a confused email from my mother about where I was for Easter. I waited for my father to notice my bank address changed. The silence that followed was total. 6 months of silence. Not one call, not one text, not one email asking if I was alive, well, or even in the same time zone. The silence wasn't painful. It was the ultimate, shocking confirmation. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't even realized a piece of their carefully curated collection was missing. My invisibility was complete. And in that total absence of their attention, I finally began to see myself clearly. My real life was about to begin. My move to Seattle, the Emerald City, was the most liberating act of my life. It was the moment I stopped reacting to the Sterlings and started creating the Sterling I wanted to be. I took the senior director role at Apex Innovations, based right outside of Bellevue, and within weeks I felt a kind of intellectual satisfaction I'd never known. My work wasn't a computer thing. It was complex, strategic, and genuinely valued. I found a luxury apartment in Capitol Hill, the kind of space that felt like a reward for all the years of quiet effort. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, where I could watch the ferries glide by and the Olympic Mountains frame the distance. Every morning, I woke up to the vast, gray-blue beauty of the Pacific Northwest, a stunning contrast to the claustrophobic, manicured perfection of Greenwich. Apex Innovations, unlike my father's old guard law firm, was a culture of true meritocracy. My team lead, Marcus, saw my skills instantly. He didn't care that I was the quiet one. He cared that my code architecture was brilliant. Within 4 months, my vision for a major consumer-facing app was approved by the executive board, and I was immediately promoted to VP of User Experience. The compensation was astronomical. My base salary was now deep in the 7-figure range, not counting the accelerating stock options. I was making more money in my early 30s than my father, the great Robert Sterling, had been making a decade ago. But the real richness wasn't the money, it was the community. In Seattle, I found my chosen family. My neighbor, Eliza, a free-spirited landscape artist who sold her work at Pike Place Market, immediately invited me to her book club. Through her, I met Jasmine, a brilliant environmental attorney with a razor-sharp wit, and Daniel, a pediatric oncology nurse whose infectious laugh could genuinely brighten the cloudiest Seattle day. They didn't see the quiet, socially awkward Harper. They saw Avery, the smart, funny, driven woman who was trying to find her footing. They showed me the hidden coffee shops, the best trails on Mount Si, and taught me how to kayak on Lake Union. Weekends stopped being lonely stretches to fill and became adventures. I even adopted a rescue golden retriever mix, a gentle, goofy dog I named Luna, who became my constant companion and, honestly, the most emotionally supportive creature I had ever known. 3 months after moving, another huge professional moment hit. My consumer app design soared past all projections, hitting 1 million users in its first quarter. The company wanted to leverage that success by creating an entirely new department focused on consumer products, with me as the executive director. It came with a corner office, a team of 20, and a compensation package that made me momentarily dizzy. That same week, I bought a gorgeous Craftsman home in Ballard, complete with a view of the Puget Sound and a backyard that was absolutely perfect for Luna. I was a homeowner in a desirable, expensive West Coast market before I had even settled all my moving boxes. With each success, the promotion, the home, the stock gains, I waited for the old compulsion. The urge to call Greenwich, to share my news, to finally earn that nod of genuine, unconditional pride. But it never came. I realized the hunger for their validation, which had starved me for 3 decades, had finally subsided. Here, surrounded by people who saw and appreciated the real Avery, that hunger had died. And still the phone remained silent. 6 months. I used to check my phone constantly, waiting for a message that never came. Now, my calendar was filled with team meetings, gallery openings, and hiking trips. I was busy living. They were busy doing whatever it is the Sterlings do. I had unconsciously cut ties with the family that had never truly seen me, and in doing so, I had finally found myself. The woman who stood on my deck, sipping coffee with Luna curled at my feet, was confident, successful, and finally, genuinely happy. That silence, that deep, long, uninterrupted 6 months of nothing, was the ultimate act of liberation. It was also the most shocking confirmation that I was absolutely, totally invisible to the people who claimed to love me the most. Then the calm shattered. It was a crisp autumn morning. I was reviewing a presentation on international expansion, a massive $500 million project I was spearheading. Luna was snoozing peacefully. My phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in 6 months. It was the private line for Robert Sterling's law office. For a moment, I considered sending it straight to voicemail. But the curiosity, the morbid curiosity of a ghost being summoned, won out. I took a deep breath, adjusted my voice to my most neutral, professional tone, and answered. "Hello, Dad. Avery. Good. I caught you." His voice was the same, brisk, businesslike, devoid of warmth, and utterly lacking any acknowledgement of the half-year of silence. "No, how are you?" "No, where have you been?" Just the sound of a CEO commanding a subordinate. "I need you to block off the weekend of November 12th, he stated, not asked. "Your brother, Liam, is getting married. You need to fly back immediately." I paused, waiting for the apology, the question, the flicker of concern. Nothing. "I see." I finally managed the single word hanging in the air. "Congratulations to Liam. Who is the lucky woman?" "Madison Hayes," he announced, the distinct note of pride reserved for Liam's accomplishments ringing in his voice. "Hayes Construction. Her father is Thomas Hayes of Atlanta. This is a major alliance, Avery. We need the entire family portrait complete. I closed my eyes. A business merger disguised as a romance. The Hays were Southern old money, influential, and precisely the kind of partnership my father's firm coveted. You'll need to be in Greenwich by Thursday for the rehearsal dinner, he continued, steamrolling ahead. Your mother has selected an appropriate dress for you. Navy blue. Conservative. It matches the family aesthetic. Family aesthetic. As if we were a brand logo and I was merely a mismatched font choice. My patience, hardened by 6 months of silence, was suddenly gone. I was about to give him the surprise of his life. Actually, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through his business-like drone with surprising clarity, I won't be able to make it. The silence on the other end was immediate and absolute. Heavier than any conversation we'd ever had. What did you just say? He finally asked, his voice tight with disbelief, the sound of a man used to automatic compliance. You won't be able to make it? This is your brother's wedding. I have commitments here that I can't break, I replied, choosing my words carefully. It was true. I had a massive product launch review scheduled that weekend. Something I genuinely could not delegate. Whatever commitments you have in Boston can be rescheduled, he dismissed, reverting to the old, outdated narrative. This is family. This is non-negotiable. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing the bomb I was about to drop. Dad, I'm not in Boston anymore. A longer pause. I could hear him shifting in his office chair, his brain struggling to process the unexpected variable. What do you mean you're not in Boston? Where are you? We're sending the car service to your old address. I moved, I stated simply. 6 months ago. I moved across the country. I'm in Seattle, Washington now. The silence this time was deafening. It was the sound of a powerful man realizing he had missed a geopolitical shift. He had been so focused on his mergers and Liam's success that he had allowed his eldest child to disappear across the North American continent. When he spoke, his voice was laced with tightly controlled anger. You moved across the country without telling us. When were you planning to notice I was gone? I countered, the irony of his indignation tasting like bitter victory. He cleared his throat, scrambling to regain control. We've all been extremely busy, Avery. Liam's engagement has taken up a considerable amount of time. Regardless, he continued, recovering quickly, this changes nothing. You will fly from Seattle instead of driving from wherever you were living. I'll have my assistant book your first-class tickets immediately. The presumption of his authority, even now, was breathtaking. Dad, I've told you I cannot make it. I have responsibilities. What could possibly be more important than your brother's wedding? He demanded. The Hayes family expects to meet our entire family. Thomas Hayes has connections in Silicon Valley that could be invaluable to my firm's tech portfolio. This is not just about Liam. This is about our family's reputation and my business interests. There it was, the real reason, the cold, transactional core of the Sterling family dynamic. I was needed not out of love, but because my absence would raise questions that might damage the carefully constructed Sterling image. I'm sorry, I repeated, my voice now completely steady, the finality of my decision a solid barrier between us. But I will not be attending. Avery Jean Sterling, he said, using my full name, the one reserved for moments of grave trouble. You will be at this wedding. The Hayes are extremely traditional. Family is everything to them. How would it look if Liam's only sister refused to attend his wedding? I don't know, Dad. I shot back, the hurt of 2 decades finally finding an outlet. How did it look when neither of my parents attended my National Research Award ceremony, or my college graduation, or any significant event in my life? I'd say the aesthetic was already pretty damaged. Another pause. I could practically hear the calculations clicking in his high-powered legal mind, trying to find the weakest point in my defense. Those were different circumstances, he dismissed, waving away my past with a breath. This is about supporting your brother on the most important day of his life. I support Liam finding happiness, I said. I'll send a generous gift, but I won't be there in person. He switched tactics, resorting to the old, reliable lever guilt. Your mother will be devastated, Avery, after everything we've done for you. Please give her my love, I replied, utterly unmoved. The guilt had lost its power years ago. He sighed heavily. If you're concerned about taking time off work, I can call your supervisor. Where are you working now? Still doing that computer thing? That question, that casual, condescending phrase that reduced my passion and my phenomenal success to a trifling hobby. It was the last straw. I felt a surge of pride, hot and electric, flood my voice. I am the executive director of user experience at Apex Innovations, I corrected him. It is a Fortune 500 company with over 30,000 employees worldwide. And I am doing very well. Thank you for asking. Never heard of it, he dismissed instantly. Is it a startup? Those things fold overnight. You should be thinking about stability at your age, Avery. It was as if he were pathologically incapable of hearing the truth. In his mind, I was still the quiet girl toiling in a basement office. He had already decided how the conversation would end. With my surrender. Dad, I said, cutting him off, I am not coming to the wedding. My decision is final. His voice turned cold, dangerous. Avery, you are part of this family whether you like it or not. You have obligations. If you refuse to fulfill them, there will be consequences. What consequences exactly? I asked, genuinely curious. The threat he delivered next was meant to shock me back into compliance. But it only served to set the stage for the most satisfying rebuttal of my life. What consequences? My father scoffed, his voice laced with the arrogance of a man who held all the financial power. Your trust fund, for one. The vacation property in Nantucket. Your place in this family's legacy. Is your petty rebellion worth throwing all that away, Avery? He was playing his last card, financial disinheritance. For a moment, the old fear, the fear of being truly alone without a safety net, flickered. But it died quickly, extinguished by the brilliant, burning reality of the life I had built. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. For the first time in our relationship, I genuinely laughed, a clear, sharp sound that startled even me, and certainly startled him. You find this amusing? He demanded, his anger spiking. I find the irony amusing, Dad, I said, taking a moment to pet Luna, who had woken up and placed her head heavily on my lap, grounding me. You're threatening to cut me off for money I haven't touched in years. You're threatening to take away my place in a legacy I have actively worked to escape. This isn't about money, Avery. This is about respect, about honoring your family. No, I countered, the clarity in my voice unwavering. This is about appearances. This is about using me as a prop in your perfect family portrait. And I'm done being a prop. I'm done being the convenient, compliant accessory. The years of repressed resentment, the empty seats, the MIT year, the computer thing insult, all fueled the strength in my voice. He was throwing $1 million threat at a woman who now had billions in market capitalization tied to her department's success. It was pathetic. "I'm very disappointed in you," he said, shifting back to the stern, patriarchal judgment. "We will discuss this further after you've had time to reconsider your priorities." He still believed he had the power to make me reconsider. "There is nothing to discuss," I asserted. "My decision is final. I am not coming to the wedding." His voice turned glacial, a tone that had intimidated Supreme Court justices but failed to move me. "Be at that wedding, Avery, or consider yourself disinherited. That is my final word." The word hung there, disinherited. To my father, it meant being cast out, stripped of the Sterling name and its privileges. To me, it sounded like freedom. "Is that your final word on the subject, Dad?" I asked, needing this on record, needing him to commit to his ultimatum. "It is," he said firmly. "The choice is yours." "Then I've made my decision," I said, a wave of pure, absolute relief washing over me. "I won't be attending the wedding, and you can keep your money, your property, and your approval. I don't need any of it anymore." There was a pregnant silence. He didn't hang up. He was processing the utter failure of his ultimate threat. He was realizing that his currency had no value in my life. "You're making a terrible mistake," he warned, his voice losing its certainty, replaced by a note of genuine bewilderment. "No, Dad," I said, correcting him softly. "For the first time in my life, I'm not making a mistake. I'm choosing myself over the role you wanted me to play. And that's a choice I will never regret." He hung up without another word. The line went dead. I sat there on my custom-designed sofa, the view of the bay spectacular, Luna's heavy head on my lap, and waited for the panic to hit. I waited for the guilt, the grief, the loss. Instead, I felt only a profound physical release. The chains that had bound me to their expectations were finally, completely cut, not by them, but by me. The shock of the situation was just beginning to hit them. They thought I was an emotional entity that could be manipulated by financial threats. They had no idea I was a ruthless capitalist in my own right, a product of their own emphasis on success and independence, only applied to my life, not theirs. I was no longer the forgotten daughter begging for scraps of attention. I was Avery Sterling, the executive director, the homeowner, the woman who finally knew her own worth. And I was about to deliver the biggest shock of my life. I couldn't resist. I had to let them know exactly what kind of daughter they had decided to cut off. I opened my laptop, drafted an email to my father's work address, formal, crisp, and copied to his personal account. It was time for the mic drop. The email I sent immediately after the ultimatum wasn't a rant or a declaration of independence. It was a clinical, carefully worded financial statement. I knew my father, Robert Sterling, understood only one language: power and net worth. My goal was to convert my emotional liberation into a shock factor that would resonate with his corporate soul. The subject line was simply family commitments and financial independence. The body read, "Dear Robert, per your final word regarding my attendance at Liam's wedding and the subsequent financial consequences, I want to confirm my decision to decline the invitation stands. Furthermore, to clarify the context of this decision and your concerns regarding my stability, I would like to provide an accurate assessment of my current professional standing, as it appears there is a significant misunderstanding regarding my computer thing. Current role: Executive Director, User Experience VP level, Apex Innovations *. Current compensation: base 7 figures, USD. *. Equity position: vesting stock options valued at over $15 million US, based on current valuation. I own my primary residence in Seattle outright. My personal investment portfolio is managed by a private wealth firm, asterisk. Action. I have initiated a full liquidation and transfer of my Sterling Trust Fund assets to my private portfolio, effective immediately. Please consider this an official refusal of any and all future inheritance, including the Nantucket property. I will have my firm handle all documentation. I make this decision not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. My value is no longer determined by your recognition or conditional financial support. I wish Liam and Madison a happy marriage. Sincerely, Avery J. Sterling. I hit send. It was the most financially satisfying, emotionally liberating email I had ever composed. It was the moment I became the shocking twist in the Sterling family drama. The reaction was not immediate. My father was meticulous about email. He wouldn't have seen it until he returned to his desk after his afternoon meetings. But when he did, I knew the reverberations would be seismic. They came the next day, not in the form of a call from Robert, but from my mother, Catherine. Her voice was shaky, lacking its usual crisp, authoritative tone. "Avery," she began, her breath catching. Your father showed me the email." I remained silent, letting her navigate the unexpected reality. 7 figures? Avery, are you telling me you're a millionaire? A multi-millionaire? The sheer disbelief, the utter failure to comprehend my success, was palpable. It was painful, but also validating. They hadn't just ignored my career. They had underestimated my capabilities to an almost criminal degree. I said, "I make more money than all of you combined, Mom," I repeated calmly, ensuring the words sank in. "My success is a direct result of the independence you've forced on me. I built this entirely without your network, your money, or your attention. But the Nantucket house..." She stammered, still reeling from the financial data. "That was your birthright. You're just giving it up." "It's a house I never visited with people who never noticed me," I said gently but firmly. "It has no emotional value. My current home, which I bought with my own money, overlooks the Puget Sound. That has value." The conversation wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about the power dynamic. My money had suddenly made me visible. They were looking at me not as the quiet daughter, but as a major financial player, a peer, or perhaps a superior. Money was the only language that could override their decades of indifference. Liam called next. His tone was a bizarre mix of forced cheer and obvious panic. "Sis, long time no talk. What is this I hear? Mom is freaking out about some investment portfolio? Are you seriously some kind of tech executive now? That's wild." "It's my job, Liam," I said flatly. "It has been for years. I am the VP of UX at Apex Innovations." He laughed, a nervous, shallow sound. "No way. Man, Mom and Dad are losing it. They thought you were just coding websites or something. Look, about the wedding." "I'm not coming, Liam," I cut him off. I know, he rushed. "But come on, Avery. This is a chance to reconnect. I need my big sister there. Remember how you always looked out for me when we were kids?" The sheer, staggering historical revisionism made my blood run cold. Looked out for him? I remembered being told to lose at chess to boost his confidence, being forced to tutor him while they celebrated his B- and sacrificing my MIT-er so he could focus on pre-med. "Liam," I said, my voice heavy with a lifetime of hurt. "We both know we haven't been close in years. When was the last time we had a real, honest conversation about anything that mattered to me?" "We're talking now, aren't we?" he retorted defensively. "Look, I know we drifted apart, but this is the biggest day of my life. The Hayes family is really traditional. They'll think it's weird if my only sibling isn't there. Mom and Dad are freaking out about the optics." "Then maybe," I suggested, letting the bitterness seep into the call, Mom and Dad should have worked harder at actually being parents to both their children, not just their favorite. The optics of my absence reflect their actions, not mine. He went silent. "That's not fair, Avery," he finally whispered. "You always had it easier. The smart one who never had to try. Do you know how hard it was growing up in your shadow, always hearing how brilliant Avery was?" I almost dropped the phone. My shadow, my entire existence, had been spent in his reflected glow. This was the first shocking glimpse into his own suppressed pain, a realization that their favoritism hadn't just damaged me. It had damaged him, too, forcing him into an impossible role of the constantly celebrated star. "Jacob, that's simply not true," I countered. "But I think you're beginning to understand what it means to be misunderstood." He hung up, stunned and angry, but the seeds of doubt were planted. The mic drop email hadn't just shaken my father's bank account. It had begun to dismantle the carefully constructed mythology of the Sterling family. The next wave of communication proved the chaos was only just beginning. After the financial revelation, the quiet phone I had cherished for 6 months exploded. It was an avalanche of obligation, guilt, and thinly veiled curiosity. The whole extended Sterling network, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen since my high school graduation, suddenly had an urgent opinion on my presence at Liam's wedding. They were calling at the direct, desperate behest of my parents, applying pressure from all sides. First, the sister of my mother, Aunt Carol, a woman defined by her need for social acceptance. "Avery, darling, it's Carol. What is this ridiculous rumor your mother is trying to squash? You simply must attend Liam's wedding. It's the social event of the season. The Hayes family are the most influential people in Atlanta. Darling, this is about networking. Your father told me about your little job. You need to be seen with the right people." Her call confirmed the worst. They still didn't see my job as legitimate success. They saw it as something needing a PR boost from a more established family. Then came the call from Madison Hayes, Liam's fiancée, a woman I had never spoken to. Her voice was pure Southern-inflected privilege, dripping with polite condescension. "Avery, it's Madison. Well, soon to be Madison Sterling. I just had to call you personally. Your parents mentioned you were having some difficulty with the dates. But darling, surely your boss would understand. It's your brother's wedding. Family comes first, don't you think?" I explained to my father, Madison, that I have a major product launch that week, I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. "I am the executive director, so I am, in fact, the boss." A moment of pure, unexpected silence. "Oh, well, surely you can delegate." My family has always believed that showing up for family is the ultimate sign of character. The implication was clear. My absence was a character flaw, a sign of my social ineptitude. Before I could respond, she dropped the ultimate, shocking manipulation. "But you're the maid of honor!" she exclaimed, her voice rising slightly in panic. "The programs are already printed. All the arrangements have been made. Liam insisted, he said. You two have always been so close." I froze. Maid of honor? They had assigned me the central, most prominent role in the wedding without asking, without calling, without even acknowledging my existence for 6 months. They hadn't just expected me to show up. They had cast me in a major role. It was the ultimate demonstration of their belief in my absolute, unconditional compliance. I was a prop in a bridal party. The anger was so intense it momentarily robbed me of breath. "Madison," I finally managed, my voice low and dangerous. "I'm sorry, but that's impossible. No one discussed this with me. I will not be attending. I suggest you talk to Liam and your future in-laws, since they're the ones who made promises on my behalf without my knowledge or consent." She sputtered, clearly thrown off script. "But what am I supposed to do now? My mother will be furious." "That," I said, ending the call, "is no longer my problem." The next week was a blur of emotional drain. My Seattle friends watched in growing concern. Jasmine, the attorney, suggested I write a formal legal letter declining the invitation and then block all their numbers for my own peace of mind. Daniel, the nurse, offered to fly to Greenwich with me if I decided to go, just to stand beside me as my moral support. Eliza, the artist, simply brought over a bottle of expensive Cabernet and sat with me on the porch, letting me vent my frustration to Luna. A week before the wedding, my father called again. His voice was no longer cajoling or manipulative. It was the cold, unyielding baritone he used in the courtroom. "Avery, this has gone far enough," he stated. "Your mother is beside herself. Liam is embarrassed. The Hays are beginning to ask questions we can't answer. You will be on a private jet to Greenwich next month. You will wear the dress your mother selected, and you will perform your duties as sister of the groom and maid of honor without complaint. This is not a request." "Or what, Dad?" I asked, completely calm. "Or I can consider myself cut off from the family?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Exactly. You are throwing away generations of wealth and privilege. Your birthright, your place in a family that has given you everything. Is this truly what you want to sacrifice over one weekend of defiance?" "I didn't realize my place in this family was conditional on absolute obedience," I said. "Where was that sentiment when I needed you? All those milestones you missed? All those times I needed my parents and got nothing but empty chairs and excuses?" "That's ancient history, Avery. This is now." "And now," I replied, standing up, pacing my bright, warm living room, "I choose my commitments, my boundaries, and my worth. I've told you, I make more money than you. Your financial threats mean nothing. Your emotional blackmail is empty. You have no leverage left." He was silent for a long moment, the utter failure of his power evident. "You will regret this for the rest of your life," he finally warned. "No, Dad," I said, feeling a sense of utter certainty. "For the first time, I'm choosing a path I will never regret. I'm choosing the truth over the role." He hung up. That was the final, definitive end of the old Avery. The old Avery would have crumbled. The new Avery felt only relief. The days following my final refusal were surreal. The direct pressure stopped, but a new, more insidious form of control began: narrative engineering. I received a text from my childhood friend, Megan, who still lived in Greenwich and frequented the same country club as my mother. "Avery, just heard the absolute craziest rumor at the club. Your mom is telling everyone you couldn't attend Liam's wedding because you've taken a year off for humanitarian work in sub-Saharan Africa. Apparently, you're building schools or vaccinating children or something equally noble. Thought you should know what they're saying to explain your absence." I stared at the message, a hysterical, disbelieving laugh bubbling up in my throat. Africa. They couldn't even manage a believable lie. Anyone who knew me, the woman who had chosen a high-powered tech career over everything else, would immediately realize I wasn't the type to suddenly abandon my entire professional life for humanitarian work. But that was the chilling genius of the lie. No one in their social circle actually knew me. They only knew the narrative, the quiet, odd daughter who was better with machines than people. The African mission transformed my absence from an act of rejection into an act of profound, self-sacrificing nobility, a narrative that perfectly served the Sterling family's image of raising global citizens. More messages followed. One cousin heard I was on a classified government assignment in the Pacific. Another family friend was told I was undergoing a secret medical treatment that precluded travel. The stories grew more elaborate and contradictory as my parents frantically scrambled to protect their flawless family facade. It proved, yet again, that their concern was exclusively for their social standing, never for my well-being. That evening, feeling emotionally raw, I pulled out an old photo album I had packed, a relic from Greenwich. I hadn't looked at it since moving, but now I felt a morbid need to confront the visual evidence of my invisibility. The pattern was striking, impossible to ignore. Photo after photo showed me on the edges. At my high school graduation, my parents stood closer to my friend's family than to me. At Christmas gatherings, I was often partially cropped out, an afterthought in the composition. And then there was the photo from my 5th birthday, me smiling awkwardly, holding a small cake with 5 candles. No one else in the frame. Mrs. Davis had taken the picture while my parents were at a charity gala and Liam was at the pediatrician. 20 years of visual evidence confirmed my peripheral, secondary existence in my own family. The next morning, I arrived at Apex Innovations, distracted and heavy with grief. My mentor, Sophia, a brilliant, no-nonsense executive in her late 50s, noticed immediately. "Avery," she said, leaning against my office doorway, "you look like you're fighting a losing battle. What's going on?" Over coffee, I told her everything. The years of emotional neglect, the disinheritance threat, the financial reveal, and the absurd African humanitarian lie. Sophia listened without interruption, her eyes compassionate but clear. When I finished, she didn't offer pity. She offered perspective. "Avery," she said, taking my hands, "answer me one question honestly. If the Sterling family suddenly ceased to exist tomorrow, what would you actually lose?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. What would I lose? Not daily contact, not emotional support, not comfort, and certainly not money. "The hope," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "The hope that someday they might see me. Really, truly see me and be proud of me." Sophia nodded. "And has chasing that approval made you feel worthy? Or has it done the opposite?" "The opposite," I whispered, tears finally filling my eyes. "Then, perhaps," she said gently, "this ultimatum is not a threat. It's a gift. A chance to finally stop running a marathon for a prize that was never going to fulfill you anyway. They have cut the cord, Avery. Now you must choose to let it go." That night, I sat on my deck, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the lights of the city shimmer across the water. The grief for the family I had never truly had finally came, intense and consuming. But beneath the sadness was a strange sense of liberation. My father's ultimatum hadn't been a punishment. It had been the final key, unlocking me from the gilded cage of their expectations. The time for seeking approval was over. The time for total self-acceptance had arrived. The next day was Liam's wedding. I knew exactly where I needed to be. The day of Liam and Madison's high-profile society wedding arrived. While my family was gathering in the opulence of a 5-star hotel in Greenwich, ready to celebrate a union based on corporate alliance, I was celebrating my own, deeply personal commitment. I did not spend the day in front of my computer, morbidly tracking social media for photos of the event. I didn't succumb to the guilt. Instead, I stood on the side of a mountain, surrounded by my chosen family. I had planned a rigorous hike up Mount Rainier with Eliza, Daniel, and Jasmine. We set out before dawn, the air crisp and cold, the only sound the crunch of gravel under our boots. For 8 hours we climbed. The ascent was challenging, demanding my full focus, physical strength, coordination, and mental toughness. It was the perfect antidote to the emotional manipulation of the past weeks. As we climbed through the dense pine forest, surrounded by the raw, unpolished beauty of the Pacific Northwest, I talked to my friends, Not about the Sterlings, but about my life, my goals, my next project, my love for Luna. They listened, offering encouragement and real, tangible support, not platitudes. "You know, Avery," Daniel said as we stopped for water, looking out at the endless expanse of blue sky. "Your parents may have given you your name, but you are the one who built your character. They missed the spectacular thing you were building." His words hit me with profound clarity. My worth wasn't determined by a seat at the Sterling table. It was built on this mountain, forged in my code, and secured by the unconditional love of the people I had chosen. We reached the summit, or at least a high, breathtaking viewpoint around noon. The view was spectacular, snow-capped peaks against a vast, clear sky. It felt like standing on top of the world, physically and emotionally. We huddled together for a celebratory photo. 4 friends, wind-blown hair, flushed cheeks, genuine, unabashed smiles. It was my anti-wedding photo. I pulled out my phone, which I had kept on airplane mode all morning, and quickly posted the photo to my private social media accounts, the ones only my current friends and a handful of former colleagues followed. I chose a single, defiant caption. "Sometimes the family you choose is the one that truly sees you. Rainier Summit." I knew the caption was a direct shot at the Greenwich establishment, should it ever find its way back to them. But it was more for me than for them. A confirmation that my power now resided in my truth, not in their perception. Later that afternoon, back in my beautiful home, I received a text from Megan. The wedding was over. The photos were being shared. The lie had held firm. Avery was still building schools in Africa. The relief that washed over me wasn't just about avoiding a painful confrontation. It was about the subtle yet profound difference in my mindset. I was not absent because I had been pushed to the margins. I was absent because I had chosen not to be there. I had exercised my right to autonomy, valuing my boundaries and my mental peace over their performative expectations. I had a quiet dinner with Luna, celebrating the massive success of the launch review I had managed remotely earlier in the week. The product was performing perfectly. My team was thrilled. My world was stable, successful, and joyful. The ties had been cut, but the wound was already clean and beginning to heal. However, the story wasn't quite over. The financial explosion had caused a tremor, and the Sterlings, built on a foundation of control and status, would inevitably react to the tremor. Their next steps, I suspected, would be the most difficult and the most human. I was no longer begging for a relationship. I had opened a new door, and now it was up to them, my parents, the older generation who had prioritized image over heart, to decide if they had the courage to walk through it, leaving their old baggage behind. The aftermath of the wedding was strangely quiet. I had waited for the inevitable legal letter from my father's firm, formalizing my disinheritance. It never came. Perhaps he was too proud to admit his financial threats had been entirely ineffective. The silence lasted exactly 1 week. Then my mother, Catherine, called. Her voice was uncharacteristically hesitant, almost small. "Avery, do you have a moment to talk?" "I'm listening, Mom," I said, bracing myself for another guilt trip. Instead, she surprised me. "Your father, he told me about your conversation, about the company, about your financial situation. Of course, money was the great truth serum of the Sterling family. It was the only thing capable of changing the power dynamic." "Yes," I confirmed. "I'm doing very well professionally. I'm the executive director, VP level." He said, "You have 30 people reporting to you, and stock options worth millions." The surprise in her voice was devastatingly genuine. It confirmed they had truly thought my work was insignificant. I lead a critical department at a Fortune 500 company, Mom. I've been doing this for years. I had no idea, she said softly. You never mentioned. I tried, Mom, I said, a wave of old bitterness rising. Many times, but no one was interested. The conversation always shifted back to Liam's residency or Dad's legal practice. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Then she said, I'd like to hear about it now, if you're willing to tell me. For the first time in my adult life, my mother didn't just talk at me. She asked me questions about me. I found myself describing the complexity of my role, the thrill of a major product launch, the design philosophy behind my work. She listened. She asked intelligent follow-up questions, showing she was actually paying attention. When I mentioned my home, she asked to see photos, exclaiming appropriately over the view and the architecture. Avery, she said when I finished, I don't know what to say. You've built an incredibly impressive life for yourself. You've achieved more than we ever realized. Yes, I agreed. I have. I wish we had paid more attention, she confessed, her voice catching slightly. We saw you as the one who was fine, the one who was independent and didn't need us. It was easier to focus on Liam's more visible, immediate needs. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a crack in the high wall of their self-justification. It was a terrifying, hopeful step toward something real. About the wedding, she began again. My decision hasn't changed, I stated firmly. I understand, she said, surprising me yet again. We've adjusted the wedding party. Your cousin, Allison, stepped in. She's a good choice. She and Liam were always close. She is, I agreed. Avery, she hesitated. Would you be willing to talk again sometime? Perhaps we could start over in a way. I think I'd like to get to know the woman you actually are. I felt the immense weight I had carried for years begin to lift. I'd be open to that, Mom, I said cautiously. But the relationship would have to be different. It would have to be based on mutual respect, not obligation and expectation. Liam called 2 days later. He wasn't cheerful or demanding. He sounded tired and vulnerable. Hey, Avery, Director of UX, huh? Apex Innovations is huge. That sounds important. It is, Liam. Dad's been weird since your call, he admitted. Really quiet. Mom's been asking him all these questions about your college awards. Look, I've been thinking about what you said, about Mom and Dad favoring me. I always thought that you were the one they were secretly proud of, the smart one who just floated through life. I was always fighting to keep up. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from my brother. His perspective was still centered on his own pain, but it was honest. That wasn't my experience, Liam. But I hope you're happy with Madison. Thanks, he sighed. I wish you could meet her. She's actually cool. Maybe after the honeymoon, we could visit you in Seattle, see this fancy house of yours. I'd consider that, I said, if you're serious about wanting a real relationship. I think I am, he replied, sounding surprised at his own words. It's weird, but finding out my big sister is some hotshot tech exec makes me want to know the real you, not the you I thought I knew. The power shift was complete. My success, the very thing they had dismissed for years, had finally made me visible, respected, and paradoxically desirable to them. I had achieved the unachievable. I had forced the Sterlings to acknowledge my value on my terms. I hung up the phone feeling a cautious hope, a readiness to explore this new, fragile connection. But the final, most human gesture was yet to come. It would come from the man whose pride was his armor, my father, Robert Sterling. The seismic shift culminated just before Christmas. My mother called with a question that in any other family would have been mundane, but coming from the Sterlings, it was revolutionary. "Avery," Catherine began, her voice tentative, "your father and I were wondering if you might consider joining us for the holidays this year. We know you have your home and your friends, but we were thinking we could come to Seattle if that would be easier for you." I was momentarily speechless. In all my years, my parents had never, ever offered to travel to me. Holidays were sacred, immovable events in Greenwich, where I was expected to appear. "You would come here," I finally managed. "If you'd have us," she confirmed. "We'd like to see your home. Meet these friends we've heard so much about. Get to know your life here." It wasn't an apology for the past, but it was an undeniable commitment to the future. I agreed, cautiously. We arranged for them to stay at a discreet, high-end hotel near my Ballard home for 3 days over Christmas. Liam and Madison would stay in Greenwich with the Hayes family, solidifying my new boundary. The day they arrived, Christmas Eve, was crisp and clear, the mountain visible across the water. My father carried the luggage, his movements stiff. My mother clutched a designer bag full of carefully wrapped gifts. Their expressions as they walked into my craftsman home and took in the soaring ceilings, the wall of windows facing the sound, and the tasteful modern decor, shifted from polite interest to genuine, unmasked amazement. "Avery," my mother breathed, looking at the view, "this is stunning. Absolutely stunning." My father walked to the windows, staring out at the Olympic Mountains and the ferries below. He stood there for a long time, hands clasped behind his back, before turning around. "You've done well for yourself, Avery," he said quietly. Coming from Robert Sterling, this was practically a declaration of love. The visit wasn't without its awkward moments. Old patterns tried to reassert themselves. My mother occasionally slipped into giving unsolicited advice about my home decor. My father struggled to initiate any conversation that wasn't about the stock market. But there were new moments, too, the deeply human moments that had been missing for 3 decades. My father asked thoughtful questions about apex innovations, finally connecting the dots between my computer thing and real-world capital. My mother genuinely laughed while playing with Luna in the backyard, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen her. At a Christmas Eve dinner I hosted with Eliza, Daniel, and Jasmine, my parents were forced to interact with the people who truly loved and valued me, seeing the warmth and ease I shared with my chosen family. On their final evening, as we sat by the fireplace with glasses of good single malt whiskey, my father cleared his throat. "Avery," he began, staring into his glass, unable to meet my eyes, "I owe you an apology." My heart hammered against my ribs. I waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I've been thinking about what you said," he continued, his voice low and gruff, "about the events we missed, the support we didn't give. I was wrong. We were wrong." He paused, collecting his thoughts, a monumental effort for a man whose life was built on never admitting fault. "You deserved better from us," he finally admitted. "You were always so capable, so independent, that I think we convinced ourselves you didn't need us the way Liam did. It was easier to focus on his more obvious needs than to understand your quieter ones. It was a failure of parenthood, Avery. It wasn't fair to you. It cost us." It wasn't a perfect apology. It still held traces of the old justification. "We thought you didn't need us," but it was sincere, painful, and the most profoundly human moment I had ever shared with him. It was the wealthy, proud man finally admitting that he had prioritized a facade over a relationship. "I can't change the past," he concluded, looking up at me, his eyes holding a depth of regret I had never seen before. "But I would like to do better going forward, if you'll allow it." "I'd like that too, Dad," I said softly. After they left, returning to Greenwich with promises to call and plans for a summer visit, I sat on my deck, wrapped in a blanket, watching the winter chill settle over the city. 6 months ago, I had been the invisible daughter begging for crumbs of attention. Now, by standing firm in my truth and my worth, I had achieved the ultimate win. I hadn't changed who I was to fit their expectations. I had been so unapologetically myself that they had no choice but to change their perception of me. The road ahead won't be perfect. Old wounds don't heal overnight. But for the first time, I felt hopeful that a new kind of relationship might be possible, one based on mutual respect, not conditional obligation. The most profound lesson I learned wasn't about money or power. It was that my value had never depended on their recognition. I had always been worthy of love and respect, even when the people closest to me failed to show it. By finally recognizing that truth myself, by building a life that honored my own needs and boundaries, I had paradoxically created the possibility for genuine, human connection with my birth family. True family, I discovered, wasn't about blood ties or obligation. It was about seeing each other clearly. I had found my voice, my strength, and my true home, not in a place or with certain people, but within myself. And for the Sterlings, the journey of learning to love their daughter for who she truly was, not who they needed her to be, had finally begun. The human spirit, I realized, is resilient enough to forgive, and even the proudest parents can be taught to see the spectacular truth of their children. Thanks for listening my story.